just what to do. And I'm so sick of pain, but it's all too quick with you. Losing this game, I can't afford to be losing this game. And I know you're the same as me. Losing my mind, can't find the words, no, I can't seem to find. But I'm really trying to get reason, rhyme, and take a time and choose. Whether we green or yellow, whether we deep or shallow. Please me now, cause we're about to lose. Whether we buy or hello, whether we stay or jello. Sometimes, honey, me, you pour a little bit of gasoline. I burned out, so to speak. Come a little closer, here's some disclosure. Do you mind to quit your pretending? Truth or false, the shit never ending. Hear me now and stop condescending. You see I'm begging, you hear me beg. If you're sick for love, don't try to hide it. Find it deep inside and try to hide it. If there's a way, I wanna know we tried it. Quit your games and now that you denied it. Losing this game, I can't afford to be losing this game. And I know you're the same as me. Losing my mind, can't find the words, no, I can't seem to find. But I'm really trying to get reason, rhyme, and take a time and choose. Whether we green or yellow, whether we deep or shallow. Please me now, cause we're about to lose. Whether we buy or hello, whether we stick or jello. I gotta move and make amends, but can't go through the same regrets. It could feel so good on mine. Love by love, again, 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 again. And I know you're the same as me.
Welcome to the Pro EDU podcast, where Rob and Gary talk and drink with your favorite photographers. So grab yourself a cold sarsaparilla and saddle up.
In this episode, we are talking brain juice, all the brain juices. We have David Parish calling in from the sunny hills of Wisconsin. Is that where you're at?
I am in Wisconsin.
I don't think I've ever called it the sunny hills of Wisconsin, but we'll go with it.
I think, is it not hilly in Wisconsin? I thought it was. Or is it very...
It was in the area we went to last time, but not so much where I'm at right now.
Oh.
Yeah, they have a lot of plains, right?
Like planes?
Yeah, like
flying planes?
No, like farmland.
Oh.
You know.
And as well, Rob Grimm is here.
Of course I'm here.
David, thank you for joining us. Today we're talking about, is it theory or is it actual science? The science of learning your brain.
Well, I mean, there's both theory and science because, you know, a lot of psychology is theory. A lot of psychology waxes and wanes as new theories come out or we understand things more. So, you know, you can't say it's both. I think I'll be pretty clear on, you know, what is researched and try to say if it's my theory, try to make a difference between the two.
Okay, so before we get into this, I know that so many people in our audience are going to know you because you are very big in the community, but they probably don't know your history and why you're an expert in performance and learning. So give us a little bit of your background so they know why we're talking to you about this.
Yeah, so I spent 22 years almost in the Army, in the United States Army. I guess I should be clear since we're a worldwide community. And approximately 2009, the Army started a program that was really based in positive psychology, and I was one of the original soldiers to get wrapped up into that. And that sort of started this quest of interest and education in various forms of psychology, to include performance psych. And I taught those things as my primary job for the last 10 years of my career. And then, as you guys know, I retired about 2.5 years ago. I retired from the Army, and still learning, still going to school for it, still practicing. So a huge interest of mine has been in the creative field since, you know, we all have these forums that we read each other's problems all the time, and just really seeing how those skill sets that we were applying and to athletes, that we're applying to soldiers, how we could bring them into the creative field to help optimize performance and make people function and maybe think about things more holistically and start thinking about creativity as a skill set. Maybe start reevaluating what we consider to be talent. And as we start to do those things and really think of things from a different point of view, maybe we collectively unlock and build our potential, realize that people are a little more limitless than probably we think.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to talk about a few things today. We're going to talk about how people can learn more effectively. And we're going to talk about learning through workshops. We're also going to talk about learning through tutorials and what people, you know, how they can benefit better, what mistakes people are making. But let's kind of start this off by talking about why creatives aren't successful. What are some of the pitfalls that you have seen that make them not really hit the mark, which is why they need to go back and learn the right way?
Right. I think the biggest thing that probably changed my whole viewpoint on learning and creativity specifically all has to do with the research from a lady named Carol Dweck. And specifically, she wrote a book called Mindset, which is, I think, probably one of the most mind-blowing, mind-altering books that I've read. But in it, she really started to think about people tend to fit into two different categories when they start considering where skills, challenges, efforts, how they view feedback, how they view setbacks. They tended to fit into two different groups. And she called those fixed mindset and growth mindset. And I think in our industry, a lot of people live in a fixed mindset, and they don't even really know it, because this is potentially the first time anybody's hearing about a mindset.
So let's define both of those. What is a fixed mindset? What is a growth mindset?
So again, I think we have to look at it from domains. So number one is it really goes into how you view those things that I just listed, and we'll talk about them again one-on-one. But it also, you have to understand that it's domain specific. So how I might view photography and I might view photography or creativity with a growth mindset. I might view going to the gym and physical activity with a fixed mindset. So even within one person, they can think multiple different ways about different domains. So
okay.
I just want to be clear that, when you're thinking fixed and growth mindset, you can't just be like, well, I'm growth mindset, and now that applies to all aspects of my life.
So it's not a set personality trait. It's something that we vacillate on depending on what we're doing.
Absolutely. And it's not a set personality trait at all, because you can develop it. This conversation can open you to it, and then you can start focusing on it and fixing it. So it's definitely not set at all. But so the first thing would be how you tend to view skills. And in our industry, I think it's also, you have to talk about how you view talent. Is talent something that you're born with? It's a fixed trait. You can't develop it. That is all there is. If that describes your way of thinking, then you're more fixed mindset. Whereas a growth mindset understands that skills and talents can be developed. They come from a place of hard work. You can always improve, which I would say probably in the domain of our community, hopefully most people are in the growth mindset, because if you're not and you're seeking out tutorials and being a part of this community, chances are you're probably in a growth mindset already. So that's the first one, is looking at like skills and talent, if you're fixed or are you growth. Mm-hmm. The next ones get a little bit more complicated. And I think that's when we start talking about challenges and how you tend to view challenges. Do you view, should challenges be embraced or should they be avoided? And I guess I can ask you guys that, do you tend to embrace challenges or do you tend to avoid challenge?
Depends on the challenge.
Yeah, no, I think it depends on what the topic is.
Right. So let's look at it as related to our work. So I know Gary's more into video and more into tech stuff, and you're still at your heart, I know, a photographer in there.
Absolutely.
You tend to look at as challenges as something that you want to seek out, or do you try to avoid challenges?
No, photographically, I want to seek out challenges, because if I don't, I'm really stagnant, and I don't find that the creativity is as rewarding. When I kind of figure something out, that gets the wheels turning, and I start testing things, and I go down. I think the good thing about being challenged photographically is that if you don't know what's going to happen, but you have a certain set of skills, that allows for things to just kind of be happenstance that you wouldn't expect, that then becomes an amazing new avenue that you didn't know you could go down.
Right.
And I like that about the photographic process. If I was doing the same thing, like if I was a photographer who only shot catalogs, just boogers on white all day, I'd be out of business in 6 months.
Right.
But because my clients have specific needs, and they have defined parameters, and sometimes they have things that they want to execute that they haven't done before, or that I haven't done before, that challenges me to make it happen. And that keeps me well engaged and keeps me growing.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, you kind of summed it up with that last sentence. In regard to challenges, you're definitely in a growth mindset. So, and when we look at fixed and growth mindsets as it relates to challenges, there are people who believe that challenges should be avoided at all costs, because they tend to believe that if they challenge themselves and if they fall flat, and you probably met these people in the industry, it becomes a summation of their talent. And if they believe that talent is a fixed thing, once they fail or once they hit that challenge and they are struggling, that sort of summarizes and says, well, here's my talent cap. So they don't want anybody to see that potential running out of talent. They don't want to see people pushing it, or see people them pushing themselves in front of people, and those people tend to give up easily because as soon as something gets challenging, they're done. Whereas a growth mindset, you feel that challenges should be embraced, much like you just described. It's just an opportunity to grow, and through that you tend to be more persistent, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around the idea of people in this business not being growth oriented, because you're gonna fail.
I think that there's those people who, they find something, it works, and then that's where they rest. That they are the best widget shooter in the entire world.
Yeah, you know what? I'm starting to think of people that.
It also depends on how people deal with failure. Like, a lot of people will not, and I know a lot of people like this, they will not take chances. They will not get out of their comfort zone. They will not travel to other countries because it's almost crippling for some people, afraid of failing. And that can be debilitating in how you make decisions. And if you get in a comfort zone of showing up to work where you're told what to do all day long, there's not much to worry about. And if your mind is okay with doing the same monotony over and over and over, and there's nothing wrong with that, then what's there to worry about? What's there to fail at?
Yeah, I'm not built that way.
Right. I think a lot of us aren't, but I think, like you said, those creatives who really just kind of get in the zone. This is what they do. They're really famous for that one thing, but you look at their whole book and it's just like a recycle of the previous thing. Like, nothing really changes. They're really scared to get beyond that because, what if this is all I'm capable of and nothing more? And a lot of people, like Gary said, a lot of people, that just gets them terrified because they don't want to admit to themselves that this is hard, and maybe the things that they believe to be true about themselves aren't. So that's challenges. The next one is how you view effort. Do you view effort as, if something becomes hard again, does that mean you're not really talented? How do you deal with effort? Those fixed mindset people tend to think that effort should be unnecessary. It's something that, when you do it, when you're good enough, it shouldn't be hard. It shouldn't require effort. And those growth mindset people tend to believe that effort is essential.
Yeah,
and that
part of the process.
Right. It is the process, and really understanding that you are on a path to what we would call mastery. You're trying to master your art. And just like the old masters of the Renaissance, it took Da Vinci 15 years to paint the Last Supper. He had multiple sketches related to it. He understood that was a path to create something. It wasn't just I'm going to wake up one morning and pound this out and we'll call it a day. That it was going to require effort.
That makes perfect sense, actually.
David, I think it was you that said only up until recently sports teams, and I think you gave the example of the Seattle Seahawks, and I think it was the first season that they brought on a coach like this. They won the Super Bowl. Is that right?
Yeah, they have a guy, his name is Michael Gervais, who works for them. So most professional sports teams at this point have somebody who has a degree in sports or performance psychology who works for them, who really a lot of what happens is you're trying to work on mind-body connection, and that's a big portion of what performance experts do, is we try to figure out, get you in the zone. Everybody's heard the terminology, I was in the zone, but did you fumble into success or did you march into it intentionally? So a lot of the stuff that I would talk about, and a lot of the stuff that you and I and Rob have talked about is related to that. Like, how do we understand where we are at our best? How do we get there more intentionally? And are there pre-game stuff that we can do to get us there? And I believe the answer, specifically as it relates to photography and specifically as it relates to creativity, is absolutely. There's a lot of things that we can do to get us to being in the right frame of mind so that when we start performing, we're there, we're on our A game. Examples might be, Rob, I've been fortunate enough to watch him shoot for a client, and he's starting setup long before the client gets there. He's starting to visual long before the client gets there. Kind of has an idea from talking to them ahead of time what they're going to ultimately want, but there's a photo that exists that they can see from the moment that they walk in the door. It wasn't, that process probably began in your mind weeks before the set started coming together. And you for sure have a demonstrable mental process that you go through that ends up producing results.
Is the growth in fixed mindset, is there research that I guess looks at, how you got in either one? Are you a product of your environment? Is it a lot of whether you went to school? Is it your parents? Like, where does it come from? How do you get into either one of them?
Absolutely. So a lot of it comes from the way that we receive feedback, even, our whole lives. We often praise, when we're looking at children, we often praise their results, and we don't care so much about their effort. So, specifically, like when I'm praising my kids, let's say my kid just climbed to the top of the ladder at the playground. He's a 2-year-old. So he gets there, instead of saying, "Oh, you did such a good job, kiddo, way to go, thumbs up," I tend to say,
"Find a bigger ladder, you little shit."
I'm not
no?
old blood.
Oh,
but I
okay.
tend to say, I really like the effort that you put into that. I could see that you were a little nervous halfway up, but you kept going. You were really persistent.
Mm-hmm.
So really praising what got him there, not that he got there, if that makes sense.
It does. Actually, there's a husband and wife team of child psychologists that have always come to my kid's school. And with the 4th to 6th grade girls in particular, they really work with them a lot on empowerment. But they work with all the parents and everybody. And one of the things that they've always said is not just to praise your kid and say, "I'm so proud of you," but to turn it on the child. And when they've achieved something, and say, "You must be really proud of what you've done."
Absolutely.
So that way the child has ownership of it, and they understand that they did something, not that they did something that we respond to, but something that they should feel positive and proud that they did themselves.
I discovered photography by accident. I found that the camera was a good tool for me to be creative, to translate kind of my ideas to something real. When I have my printed pieces, people always doubt, is it a painting or is it a photo? I think everybody could get this painterly look. It's really important to look at every little detail, even the details no one will ever notice. The secret is being so dedicated to the thing you want to make. For this tutorial, we created 2 different images. The darker one is a portrait of a girl holding his flamingo. It's a composite. It throws you back in the 18th century golden age feeling. As a contrast to that, we also created a more lighter image. We composited a backdrop from at least 6 or 7 original paintings. We used that as an element in the story. We made a composite of 4 characters played by only one girl. We made tiny changes in her hair, in her dress, just to give the girl another character, so it's conceptual. I think it's a good example to show how my process evolves to the final image. I'm not as technical as other photographers. I'm more in creating the image than doing it by a book. So I do hope that with this tutorial I can show you how to make an image that's yours and not an image that's made by rules or made by anything in a fixed way.
Let's pick up with feedback. Let's talk about how people tend to view feedback if they're fixed mindset or growth mindset. Because I think this is the biggest thing I see in our industry is, people who are fixed mindsets, when they get feedback on it, they tend to get really defensive and they take it super personally. Mm-hmm. And a growth mindset individual takes feedback, obviously looks at the source. I'm not going to take feedback, especially in the internet age, from anybody and not look at the source. But a growth mindset person tends to look at feedback as something that's useful, something that they can learn from, and tend to identify areas from that feedback in which they can improve. But, I think we can all agree, we've seen it in our community. We've seen it on multiple Facebook groups where somebody asks for critique is provided, and then immediately they're just like, oh, I shot it that way on purpose. Or, they get really defensive. They start mouthing off to people, and before long you have this little troll fight back and forth. Right. So that's kind of another way to look at fixed and growth mindset, specifically as it relates to getting feedback. And as we all know, feedback is critical, especially if it's from a source that is educated. There's somebody you look up to. Now, I will say, and this goes for all the instructors that I've seen almost across the board, but a lot of times in groups, whether it's inside our group and one of the instructors jumps in and says something, or whether it's in one of the other million photography related groups, often I think instructors give feedback that's too nice, and every photo is, that's great.
I'm guilty of that. I know that.
It's not real, and it's very quickly, anybody who's paying attention can very quickly see through it and realize that, Rob, now that you mentioned it, I'll call it out. Like, during your live feedback critique the other day, I was texting you afterwards and was like, is every one of those what you said, or are you too afraid to?
Rob's on the hot seat.
Well, no, I agree with him in the sense that I'm very conscious because I don't want to discourage people, but I also at the same time I'm pointing out every tangent, things I don't like. I'm saying what I don't like about it, but then I usually do wrap it up with good job, nice shot, or that's a solid shot. I say solid shot a lot, right? Right. That's my default.
And people have to take a shot every time you say tangent.
They do, and they get really drunk. They get blasted drunk, which is great because they probably can't remember at the end that I'm saying that's a nice solid shot. So hopefully they'll remember.
But I was lit after the line critique. That was rough.
Well, that's how it goes. But seriously, it's hard. I don't know. Is it hard to critique? Because I do feel like, you tell me, I do feel like I'm pointing out flaws, and I'm telling people where I think that things are not good.
But and I think you can maybe, what you're looking for is a chance to praise something, and you can certainly praise the effort without necessarily saying that the whole thing is solid, because clearly, I don't know, let's say if you're giving 10 points and 8 of them were critique and 2 of them were like, but I like this, was the whole image really solid at that point? And that's just to add some kind of arbitrary numerical value to it. But you could still be like, obviously, you put a lot of effort into this. You wasn't something you just slapped together. So you're encouraging somebody to try again without giving them fake praise.
Yeah, I think I need to rephrase it, because I am saying things like solid shot, and that's my default. And I think I'm very conscious of creating that sandwich where, when you're criticizing, pointing out flaws, you want to show strength. Talk about strengths, then the weaknesses, and then wrap it with strengths, so that people don't feel like they've just gotten beaten to death. So I think that does play into my approach with them.
The compliment sandwich.
Yeah.
I don't like the compliment sandwich.
Well, it's not so much it's not a compliment sandwich.
Start with a positive, then get the negative, then do a positive again. I see that shit coming from a mile away.
It's not.
Fuck your buns. Give me the meat.
It's a criticism, but you're also talking about what's good and what's not.
All right, so there's 4 ways to give feedback.
Okay.
You want to hear about them, Rob?
Sure,
Grimm?
let's hear about them.
All right. Positive general, positive specific, negative general, negative specific.
Okay.
Nice shot, bro. Positive general.
All right.
I really like that shot because the light wraps around and brings out the tones in the label. Positive specific. Same thing with don't like the shot. Negative general. Doesn't really do much for you. Same thing. It's just as damaging to give a nice shot feedback. So like when you give criticism in a way that's just like so general, it doesn't help anyone in any way of like what was good about it.
And even to expand on what I've learned as an instructor over the decade that I've been a teacher now is that what ends up happening is that your students sometimes, not all the time, but some people will start to fail because they get more of your attention. If you give someone more feedback because something was screwed up, if they fumbled into success, if they don't exactly know why this image is great, they look at it and they're like, yeah, this is a good image. I don't know what's necessarily speaking to me. If you don't give that specific feedback that you give for something that's good the same way that you do as something that's bad, then somebody who fumbled into something successfully doesn't learn from it, if that makes sense.
I think so.
Definitely.
But correct me if I'm wrong. I am pointing out a lot of the things that people need to improve on.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm not.
Let me ask you: am I talking about it too long? Because I know when I do these critiques, I'm doing like 20 images, and it'll take a couple hours because I feel like I'm talking about every image in absolute detail, every edge of it, like where my eye is going, corner to corner, corner.
I mean, sometimes there's definitely been a few, and I wish I honestly didn't think about it when we were going through the critique last time to start writing stuff down until probably 3/4 of the way through. But that's why I immediately was writing you, is because I was like, well, there's sometimes where you're just, hey, this is a great shot. I think you said that one time. I don't even really know where to go with this one. And you did give it some positive feedback, but you didn't spend nearly as long because I think there just wasn't a lot in your mind to correct, or even really beyond like, hey, this is this light, this is this.
So reinforce so talk about the positive, not reinforce the positive, but talk about what's working. Yeah, all right, I got it.
I got a question. You ready?
Sure.
I want to fire this one in hot. All right, so I see this time and time again in a lot of photography groups. There's a lot of lurkers, people that they're in a lot of groups, they spend a lot of time looking at groups, but they never post. And I think a lot of them aren't commenting because they haven't posted yet, so they don't have that bank of like, all right, I've been posting it and commenting. So how can someone who is just deathly afraid to make a post, get in that mindset of like, all right, I'm gonna make my first post. I'm gonna ask for critique. And what's in your opinion, the most appropriate way to ask for critique? There's a moth in here. Do you see this?
Yeah. I think the way that you would
shadow
ask
it created, Sean?
Hold on, Gary's distracted by a tiny moth.
Hit it over to Rob. No, it's flying over there. Oh. Just hit Rob with the moth. Let's play ping pong with it.
It's hard to hit.
Yeah, I know. All right.
Just caught a little of it. All right.
Get him over here.
Yeah.
Get him over here.
He's over there now.
Moth interruption.
Yeah, sorry. This moth interruption was brought to you by Wisconsin.
So I think it's the way that you view setbacks, which is actually the last part of this whole mindset thing too, is if you view setbacks as just an opportunity, as a wake-up call for you to look at it and say, hey, you're right, that feedback is valid. But I think the biggest thing that we get wrapped up into is fear. That's what holds people back from posting. It's this negative comparison. I don't match up to you, so I won't even step up to the plate. And I think a lot of times people are comparing themselves to somebody's, I don't know, like you're looking at Leibovitz's work and she's now 40 years into the game and you're in your 5th year, but you're somehow thinking that you should be where she is at in your 5 years. Like that doesn't happen. Nobody does that. Nobody picks up a camera and 5 seconds later is at the top of the game. So I think a lot of times that negative comparison comes in, but I think when you're asking for critique, you just have to be very honest with yourself. Like, I'm not going to be here, but the feedback that I'm going to get is going to be extremely valid. I have to take it, learn from it, and try the whole image again. And that's probably the biggest thing, is I think that often people don't set up the same image again. They try to move on to something new, where the last image is really where you need to stay at.
Yeah,
I said, it took years to paint one painting.
I see that a lot. People in the audience are not going back and actually reworking. They read the criticism or they hear the criticism, but then they don't go back and attempt it again. They just go on to something else, thinking that, okay, well, I'm going to apply it the next time, versus going back and so it's like you got to go back and redo the math problem, right? You can't just learn that you did the math problem wrong and then say, okay, well, on a different problem, I'm going to do it right. You got to get the math problem right.
Right, because the next problem isn't even the same problem. It's got new numbers, new quotations. It's completely different.
The other thing I think I see people do when they ask for criticism or critique, when their first time posting, they always say, hey, first time I've ever posted in here. Like, it's almost like they're asking people to be gentle with them.
Right.
You know, that's the way I read a lot of people's stuff, and it's like, oh, that's a hard one, because you want good feedback.
It takes a lot to give good feedback, though. Like, and that's why I see so many people default to the positive general. It's because it's like so easy to type nice shot, but to sit there and to then like think about it and then write several paragraphs and then like keep up with the thread, it just takes so much time, and it's hard to do.
A lot of people also don't know. Well, they don't have enough experience. They can't. If they don't know what a really good photograph is, they know more what's cool and what they react to viscerally than really understand what makes a good photograph. That's a problem.
And I think a lot of that is in the culture that we generate too. I mean, you know, we've talked about it. People tend to default to the nicety because they think that's what our culture demands, that if they are mean in the forums that they're going to get booted. But I mean, honestly, I think if in our community, in the pro EDU community, if we could agree that like feedback is a positive thing, and you know, there's going to come a time when you post your image that you're going to want it. So you need to dedicate the time to the community to also give it. And if you're not willing to give it, then you shouldn't be receiving it either. But I think we really need to foster that in the community and just realize that, you know, hey, some of this critique's going to be harsh and it's going to maybe make you think really hard, and also start encouraging people to go back and do this same shot again. Don't move on to the next thing. Go back and do the same shot again, because it's not where you want it to be.
It makes me wonder.
Don't give up.
It makes me wonder how many people tear their sets down or just completely move on. And I know when you're dealing with models, with people as subjects, it's very difficult because they're not still going to be on set. But I know when I was growing up in the photo business, I mean, we would leave sets up for days. And you would come back and tweak it. Once you'd see the film and you go, sheesh, I don't like this area. And you go back and tweak it and shoot more film and wait for that to be processed and come back. I mean, it could take, 3 days, 4 days to make a shot.
Yeah. I mean, I know especially when I'm shooting at home, my sets, even with models, tend to stay up for a long time.
In case you want to come back to it.
Yeah, because there's sometimes I do. Sometimes I've looked at the photos afterwards, realized I missed focus or something, I don't know, my lens was locked into something else and everything's screwed up, and I just ask people to come back, especially if it's a fun thing. But I usually leave things up for a few days just also so I can document in my mind where everything was, and what led to, if I knocked it out of the park. And this is another area outside of mindset completely that I think a lot of people screw up is, when you fail at something, you tend to tear it all apart. You'll get knee deep in how you failed. But when you get a winning image, when you knocked it out of the park, so many people just run away with the trophy, with the winning image, and they never stop to think about, what did I do this day that was different? How was I thinking while I was shooting? How did I physically feel while I was shooting? What kind of music was I listening to? What led to everything clicking and coming into place? Because that's really where the repeatability lives. That's where the secret to success really lives, is in understanding both, where your mind is at, physiologically where you're at, how you felt in the moment. All of that is the secret to getting into the zone. But if you never think about it, particularly when you were successful, how do you know how to repeat it? How do you know what that feeling feels like?
You're talking about state-dependent learning.
Well, I mean, if you're in a learning state, but I'm saying even if you're in a go phase, like if you're shooting for a client and you knocked it out of the park, are you stopping to capture all that data?
That's interesting, because I've always stopped to capture my set. I document my set. I measure the distance of my camera from the floor and from the subject and where the lights are. I'll photograph them and I'll write down all my power settings. I've never thought about the music. I've never thought about like the ancillary stuff. Like, what were the clients like? What kind of challenges were they giving me? What was that relationship work like? What was the crew like? I've never really thought that I should document that, but I'm hearing you say that I should.
Where's your mind at? I like to even get into, did I do something different outside of my normal morning routine? Did I drink a different coffee today? I mean, everything, because sometimes you just unlock something that everything works. Where, I mean, we've all had that day where we basically wake up and we play the perfect playlist, and the day just, by the time you hit work, everything just seems to be clicking and popping. But why is that day so much different than every other day? And I think that becomes the secret to repeatable success.
All right, I got a question about processing feedback, and I'll use an example of how people rate our tutorials. About 80% of the ratings that we get that come in for tutorials are 5 stars, and about 10% of them are 4 stars. And the feedback, a lot of it is, for the most part, like I said earlier, positive general. But when we look at the overwhelmingly positive what people liked, I then compare that to the 1, 2, and 3 stars that we get, and I'm always looking for ways to improve, how to make our tutorials better. Like that's just something we always talk about, like every single day. How do we make them better? And then when we get feedback that is for a specific tutorial, and it's like, you didn't give enough examples. But when the majority of the feedback, or we didn't do enough photo shoots to provide examples, we felt like we did. The majority of people are giving us a good rating. How do we process that the minority of people, a small amount of people that are saying, you did this wrong and it was very negative specific?
I mean, I think all feedback comes with a grain of salt. Like, again, you have to consider the source. But if the mass majority of your population said X and you had one divergent, you have that one person who's just like, I'm rebelling against all this and this is why. I'm not saying that you ignore their feedback, but you as we all know, anybody in business knows, you cannot make everybody happy. It cannot be done.
No, it's
So
impossible.
unless you're going to be like, okay, well, we're going to go back to the drawing board, film 5 more shots and just send them to you alone, then some people are going to be unhappy about something. I mean, especially in the Yelp age, people will complain about, they'll always find something to complain about. And there are those people who just see the world as a really sucky place, and they're unhappy. They're not happy unless they're unhappy. So I think specific feedback you have to analyze, but you also just have to analyze it for, I guess, what I would call the nuggets of truth. If you look at any Yelp review, people are going to, whether negative or positive, they're going to go through this huge list of things that they liked or didn't like. But within that, there's going to be a lot of fluff. And when you cut away that fluff, there's just that one nugget that you're like, okay, this is an actionable thing.
Did you know they have power Yelp reviewer meetups in every city where Yelp identifies power users that give like a ton of reviews and then like send them to like a happy hour to all just get together and
Did not know that.
criticize. Yeah. All right. So David, you've actually spent thousands of dollars on tutorials with us throughout the years.
Absolutely.
What is your feedback now? How do we make our tutorials better?
This is a loaded question.
No, it's not. Don't give me the shit sandwich either with something positive first. Just give me the fucking meat.
Right off the bat. So there's a few I think, and this is the soldier in me, just to be clear, but I love terminal learning objectives. I wish that each segment started with the instructor saying, here's what you're going to learn from this section. And then at the end of that section, they say, hey, from this is the key point you should have taken away. If you do not have this key point from this thing, go back and watch again. Don't go to the next section.
Don't level up.
This. And then I really wish they would assign homework per section, because I don't have the raw data that you guys have, but my belief is the mass majority of tutorial watchers, of your tutorial watchers, aren't actually even setting up the sets that they see in the tutorial. They're not even actioning it properly, and more than likely the way that they're consuming the tutorial isn't in an effective learning strategy. They're probably editing on one screen with a tutorial playing over here that they're listening to, because everybody in America believes that multitasking is a real thing. It's not. Science says it. All
right, so wait, develop that. So don't multitask?
No,
focus.
No, not at all. Multitasking is the great American lie. And I know that there's going to be people that are having very visceral responses and they listen to this, but if you think about your brain as a computer, the more tasks that you have open, the more everything slows down, right? And the reason that happens often, especially as our brains are concerned, is we might think that if I'm doing two tasks, 50% of my brain is on this task and the other 50% is on this task. But the reality is more along the lines of 20% of your brain power is on this task, 20% is on this task, and the other 60% is trying to switch back and forth between the two.
All right, so let's define multitasking. This is like, what do you mean by like doing two things at once? Because you can't do two things at once.
So some things you can do two things at once, especially things that involve muscle memory. Like you can chew bubble gum and walk at the same time, because that's muscle memory. There are certain things that you can do. But let's say if you're trying to absorb the material in a tutorial and you're editing at the same time, the brain capacity that it takes to do both of those things, to even listen and store somewhere beyond your short-term memory, that you're just not going to be able to do that. You're going to be too distracted or giving too much attention to one or the other. So either you're going to have a really crappy picture, or you're going to absorb no information from the tutorial.
Okay, so we're talking about learning and doing something else at the same time. What about working? What about doing like things
a lot of different ways? And I know you're a big fan of multitasking, so you're probably one of those people that's having a visceral response to what I'm saying.
No, I want to learn more about what you're talking about, because, for me, multitasking is, having a lot of browsers open at once, whether it's responding to emails while also, just doing some sort of research, just like small, things that don't require a lot of brain power and thought that just need to get done, on a day-to-day basis. There's a lot of that.
They require a ton of brain power, but they require more than you think. And also, when, let's say you're answering emails, but at the same time you keep jumping over to another screen to read little amounts of research, you'll probably find yourself reading the same sentences over and over again, or you'll find yourself making critical mistakes in the typing of the email. You're probably writing out something and then deleting it, or accidentally sending an email to the wrong person, because your brain just doesn't really work that way. We want it to, but you're missing information somewhere, if that makes sense.
So everyone should plan out their day, by the hour, or until that one task is done and then move to the next one?
I mean, there's a lot to be said for planning. I even in the way I consume tutorials, for instance, I develop all tutorials into what I call a power hour, which is literally a planned process that lasts for 1 hour. And that's how I consume tutorials. Like it is a step-by-step, like 5-step process that I go through every single time. Actually, I have it looks pretty bad right now. This is how I consume tutorials. This is one for Chris Knight. Just pulled it out of my notebook, like literally how I consume tutorials.
So you set that up specifically for the Chris Knight tutorial?
Yeah, so this one is specific Chris Knight's tutorial.
Okay, that's not templated for every tutorial. This is how you're going to do it. You break them down each time.
Specifically, right. So, I'll give you an example since I know it's going to be impossible for everybody to see, and there's obviously a podcast element involved. But step 1 is prepare to learn. All right, so you have to tell yourself, like, I'm going to school. I approach all tutorials the same way as I would a workshop. I've paid a lot of money because I have to learn from this. And if I'm going to learn from it, I need to make sure that my environment is set up just like it would be for a workshop. I've put away distractions. Again, tons of people keep their phone on them. If it's your learning time, like I'm in school, that's it. So like in this one that I have written out, I just happen to have for Chris Knight, it says, I'll sit on my couch in my office with my iPad and a notebook. Phone and others are not present in the room. All right, so that's my prepare to learn phase. In step 1, it's set my intention. So the first 2 to 5 minutes of that hour, I'm going to set my intentions. What am I trying to get out of the next hour? And for that, I wrote down, I'm watching pose 2 of the Don Quixote shoot. I'm focusing on the narrative aspect of the storytelling through photography. So again, I'm not even looking at the lighting. I'm not looking at anything. The only thing that I want to do right now is focus on the narrative aspect of the storytelling of his photography. That's all I care about. And then the next 5 minutes of that hour, I'm establishing my actions. And my actions are, what specifically do I need to do or look at? And I wrote down, I'm watching for narrative aspects of the set and posing in the model, as well as camera angles while ignoring lighting or camera settings. Next step, learn with a purpose. So for the next 30 minutes, I'm doing nothing but concentrating. All right. And I wrote down, note taking is completely focused on the model, the set, and the angles. I'm looking at what speaks to me as well as meets the criteria of the story Chris has stated that he is trying to tell. Every 5 minutes, I will pause the video to ask myself what I might do differently in this moment. Next step, review your progress. So the next 10 minutes after that, I'm going to review my progress. This is where I review my notes. If I don't understand the note that I made, I'm immediately going to refocus and rewrite this particular note so that I can get clarity while everything is in focus and in my short-term memory. Then after that, the next 10 minutes, take a break, walk away from the computer completely, leave the office, stretch, grab a snack, and then you're ready to start all over again. That's how I approach each and every hour of a tutorial.
I'm going to start approaching Friday nights like this, Rob. Were you thinking what I was thinking?
No.
6 o'clock hits. I'm going to sit down, get rid of all this work, crack a beer, and only drink this beer for the next 5 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, it's focused.
And then 5 minutes
Was that a
later,
Pepsi? Are you a Pepsi guy instead of Coke?
No, well, I'm at grandma's, dude. I don't have a choice.
Oh, the Pepsi was provided.
At all often.
You know what's bullshit? I was at a concert the other week, and I ordered a Jack and Coke, took one sip of it, and I was like, what the hell is this? And he's like, it's Pepsi. I'm like, I said a Jack and... Who? What? It's the worst.
Things happen. So I got a question about that.
Yes, sir.
You set out with great intention to learn from that hour in the tutorial. How do you decide and know everything you want to get out of that section of the tutorial when you haven't viewed it yet, and you don't necessarily know what's in it? Where are you making that decisions of what you're going to get out of it?
Almost with your guys' tutorials, usually there's an introduction that tells me what's about to happen. Yeah. So like, if you look at the Chris Knight tutorial, and this is just pulling it from memory, when he started talking about the second pose of the Don Quixote shoot, he was introducing what he was wanting to do there. So I often am looking for in tutorials, maybe, I guess, the unintended message or the message that the instructor is stating without directly telling you this is what, because you guys don't have that element of this is what you're supposed to learn here. I'm listening for that. I'm listening for, hey, this is what I'm hoping to get here. And as soon as I identify that, I'm sitting down and I'm writing out what I'm going to do for that particular thing. And I also watch your tutorials on average 3 times. So the first time is usually just to get a brief run through. I don't take notes. I'm just getting a feel for what everything is. So by the time I'm writing a power hour, I've already seen the tutorial once. And this is usually my second walkthrough is when I'm doing this particular thing. Second or third is when I'm getting into a power hour.
That makes sense. It's like Shakespeare. You have to read Shakespeare 3 times.
Do you?
Yeah, you have to read it once for plot, because you have to understand the story. You have to read it once for character, and you have to read it once for language, because his language is so complex and his plots are complex. That
Ye are right, Rob.
I am
Ye
right.
are right.
I am right.
And it might have been breaking up, but are you calling him Don Coyote?
I'm not.
Because I think we should call him Don Coyote from now on.
Don Coyote.
I feel like that could be my alter ego, Don Coyote.
It could be
I
yours.
think that is your alter ego, actually. Yeah.
Well, Sean. Yeah, no, that's Sean's, because Sean's spirit animal is a gangly coyote.
A gangly coyote?
Yeah, that's his spirit animal.
Why is it gangly?
That's actually the shirt we should make him for the Pro EDU Animal House shirts. It's just a gangly coyote. That's his house. It's weak and shriveled. All right, so
pathetic.
David, I know you have some strong thoughts on the 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
Can you, for people who don't know what that is, kind of talk about that, and then what's your opinion on that?
All right. Well, I mean, that kind of goes back to, I gave you guys an outline before we started this, and that goes back to one of the points I was talking about in why people should still take workshops and or do tutorials. But basically, obviously, the 10,000 hour rule made famous by Malcolm Gladwell in the Outliners. And he said that basically it takes 10,000 hours or 10 years to become a master in any given art form, in anything. So it takes about 10,000 hours, 10 years to do that. The research is stolen. It's not his. And he failed to articulate it properly.
It was a French guy, right? That came up.
Yeah. No, Ander, he's lived in America forever. I don't think he's French.
Oh, I thought he was.
He's a European, but I don't think he's French. But Erickson is the guy whose research it is, and he's pretty much the world's expert on experts. And he did say that it takes approximately 10,000 hours, but there's tons of ways to shortcut it. One being what the photography community has long ago forgotten, and that's learning underneath somebody else. And I know, we've all had this discussion now on whether or not anybody is left who can be a self-taught photographer.
Don't get me started on that.
That was so much better moving forward. The sun was strobing through the trees.
I'm gonna look. I was told to look at the camera, so I just now noticed that the sun is setting behind me. So.
Yeah.
But so I actually, to talk about this 10,000 hour rule, we saw the other day when Rob was doing his online photo critiques, there was a photo submitted by Anna Smith, Tony Smith's daughter.
Yeah, 17-year-old girl.
She's 15 years old, right? And
15,
submitted.
Yeah, 15.
Yeah, I think she's 15, and submitted an amazing photo. But what does she have that probably your average 15-year-old who's picked up the camera in the last couple of years doesn't have?
A father who's a photographer and access to a lot of information on photography that's already in her brain.
So she's been watching photography probably her entire life. And whether or not she knows it, she has taken in a lot of data from that. She has a built-in coach who has twice the amount of experience that she probably has on the planet. And so her 10,000 hours is automatically getting cut down because, again, whether or not she realizes that she's probably been in school for photography her entire life. She has been taking in information, hearing dinner conversations between her parents, talking about mistakes. Of course, when her dad teaches her, just like any apprentice or any teacher teaching an apprentice, he's not going to teach her any of the things that he screwed up. So she gets to jump over the mistakes directly. He's only going to teach her the ways that he succeeded. And that's why we tend to see apprentices get better with each generation of people.
Can I be devil's advocate?
Sure.
She's 15. She's
Right.
been exposed to this her entire life. So hasn't she had that 10 years, that 10,000 hours?
But that's, has she practiced? I mean, she's got 10,000 hours of exposure, but the 10,000 hours is actually of doing.
Yeah.
Beyond that, if you look at the original research, he said it had to be purposeful practice. So we've all probably met those people, especially in the photography community, who have 10,000 hours of shooting, but they're still suck. Why? Because if you practice something the same way, you don't challenge yourself. You are afraid of critique. You live in your little bubble. You never get better. You've got 10,000 hours, but you haven't improved because you're not actually doing anything to improve. You're not practicing purposely. You're just repeating.
Right. And repeating bad habits is a bad problem, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
But we see do it all the time.
Absolutely.
You brought up the term self-taught photographer earlier.
Yeah.
I made a post about that the other day, and I said there's no such thing as a self-taught photographer, just to see how polarizing and whose views were where. What's your viewpoint on that?
I don't think anybody's taught anymore. I think the only way you can truly be self-taught is if you're going out, nobody's explaining anything about the machine, and you're just, in the Army we would call it fumble fucking your way into success. And if you're not fumble fucking your way into success and basically shooting and being like, well, that didn't work, what's next? If you never get on YouTube, you never buy a tutorial, which if you're in our community, you bought a tutorial. That's the only way you can be self-taught, in my opinion, is if you, the beauty of Pro EDU, the thing that I love about it, and the reason why I've been in this community since 2014, is because like we have access to the world's best instructors. I mean, and that's not a promotional plug. It's just the truth. You know, I actually joined, as you guys know, not to necessarily learn photography skills. I was actually researching what elite performers were doing differently. Like I love the early tutorials where it showed more of people like screwing up and then being like, where, you know, you would hear people talk to themselves and just be like, well, that didn't work. Let me tweak this. And I got to hear all that stuff really turned my crank, because I got to hear what elite performers do, even the self-talk that's what I'm interested in. I want to learn about what habits people have that make them successful, how they function differently than the rest of us.
So I think that's an example of some of the feedback we were getting that was more on like the 50-50 side. So early on, if you've taken some of our earlier tutorials, we would shoot for 7 to 10 days and make like a 20 to 25 hour tutorial. And I think we got some feedback, not a lot, that said, you know, make them shorter, because we want to encourage people to approach a tutorial and feel like they can finish it, not be like, oh, fuck, that's 25 hours of time. So like, we made that decision to like expedite a lot of the photo shoots and not, you know, watch the lighting setup and the breakdown and like fumble through shots and try and get there. I personally like that, and I know everyone learns differently. But now, you know, our tutorials have gotten easier to consume. The information's still there. We still shoot just about as much, but we're cutting out more in order to make them more expedited, because it feels like we have to be providing these like super dense information, you know, tutorials that you can learn from quickly, because it's all about speed now, right?
Well, I think that's the mistake. I mean, again, if you were accepting the 10,000 hour rule, yes, you can fast forward it, but the truth is, in my opinion, if we go back to old school methodology, the way that people tended to learn was to be glued to somebody else's hip, and you're watching everything that they do step by step by step, and that's how you learn. The reality is I think we need to go back to learning like children learn. A toddler, I mean,
on an iPad
right now, my daughter will fall down 1,000 times just trying to get up on her hands and knees so that she can crawl, and never think twice about it. She's going to fail over and over and over again and never think twice about it. She has no shame in it. She has no guilt in it. She will continue the same efforts over and over and over again. And I think that as adults, we tend to get wrapped up in the successes. Like, if I pick up a pencil, if I'm meant to draw, I'm going to do it in the next 10 minutes. And the reality is that's that's not true. It's not going to be, it's never been true in human history. And until we can be plugged into the matrix and have information uploaded, it never will be true.
Right.
So if you think shortening a tutorial just so that people can get instant access and get through it faster, you're consuming tutorials the wrong way. If you think that's going to get you results, you're thinking about it the wrong way. And you're missing all those gems of just like Eric Almus, like, okay, why isn't this working? Let me think about it. And you see his wheels spinning, and he's self-talking, and he's moving himself through the process. That's what I love.
Yeah, and that's what pros do.
Yeah. And I want to see that. I want to see what a professional photographer, what he really, really does. And that's what teaches me, because since the world of assisting is basically gone, and I can't be glued to somebody's hip, and because fear, in my opinion, I mean, this is what I wanted to talk to you about, Rob, was how fear probably overtook the industry a long time ago. But you know, since I don't have that opportunity to glue myself to and learn from somebody directly, I only have one option, and that's where I thought the early tutorials were just gold.
That's really interesting. We've talked a lot about it. I mean, I think that there's so much value in just watching a photographer shoot.
I think so.
Just like see their whole process.
It's not as
it's impossible to set up all these different scenarios and teach everything, but like letting somebody see an entire shoot is definitely interesting. I think but a lot of it depends on people's mindsets. Some people, you're probably one of only a handful of people that have actually watched the entire 25 hours of Almas. I guarantee you a lot of other people scrub through it.
Three times.
Yeah, that's 75 hours, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's dedication.
But I mean, and the truth is like even with Almas, like if somebody went to go look for my work and were like, where is that 75 hours infused? And I was actually just talking to Kate Woodman about this the other day. It hasn't been really infused in my work because like I love the idea of composites, but I haven't got into them at all. And since he's composite heavy, it still just doesn't exist in my world. Like I just don't have it there at all.
All right, so since we've switched and now have added, we didn't switch, but we've added streaming, and we specifically chose Wistia because we have really advanced analytics, because we were curious, are people finishing these long ones? Of course we can poll people, but nothing is going to give us the data to be able to make a decision, like are people actually finishing which tutorials and at what rate? So we've been letting it run for months. So we're going to have the ability to look at, you know, are people finishing Eric Almas's at what percentage versus one that's 4 to 6 hours?
Yeah, and a lot of that data is probably gone on the original people who bought it and downloaded. So potentially some of that's gone. But I would be massively interested in that data just to see where people pause, what they watch over and over again. I mean, I think that's where the nuggets of truth are. In, you know, and even for instructing, this is a little tangent, but you know, because we got to get that in there. But even instructors, I mean, you know, I had a college teacher tell me one time, you know, what happens when we stop looking at our students as less than and start considering them to be geniuses. We start teaching up instead of teaching down. And there's a few instructors, I think, that really teach up and teach at their level. And there's other people that are teaching for the lowest common denominator, and they're trying to cater to that. I think the catering is a mistake. But I think instructors also have to have the mindset of, you know, their resume, their students' work is their resume. So if you look in some photography groups, there's been some instructors who clearly have resonated with the audience because the body of work by far in that group drastically increased as a result of them releasing a video or releasing a tutorial. And I think all instructors also have to be in the mindset of that needs to be their game. They need to be thinking about grooming people because their resume depends on it. I mean, if if you're a workshop teacher and I go to look at all the people who claim to have taken your workshop and none of them have gotten better, you think I want to sign up for your workshop? I'm good. Same thing with tutorials. If nobody gets better off of them, how many do you want to buy some?
Yeah. Okay. Here's a question for you. How many people do you think are at your level where they're actually analyzing that? You may be going and seeking out students of instructor to see their website and how good they are, but I guarantee you the majority of people aren't. I don't think they're doing that.
I tend to believe that's true too. But I think we all, we talk about it a lot with pricing, talking about making a drastic cultural change and bringing people under our wing so that we can stop the bleed out in our community. Why aren't we doing the same with how people learn? Why aren't we trying to say, hey, critiques isn't that big of a deal. You're not going to die. Why aren't we trying to adapt and have these conversations? Like, we're having a real conversation right now about these things, but there's so many. I mean, there's probably more than I can talk about in an hour plus with you guys about the mistakes I see people making, just being that lurker that Gary was talking about earlier and watching how people interact in these forums across the board. I mean, like Gary said, I've not only dumped thousands of dollars into you guys, I have a membership to Sue Bryce's thing. I bought Laura Jade's, all of her crap. I don't want to say crap.
Don't say
not
that.
Bad.
All of her courses.
Crap in a good way.
Stuff. So I have tons of Creative Live videos.
Rest in peace.
No, that's crap.
But in general, like
it was the tutorial we did. That's the one you bought from Creative Live.
I do have that actually. But I've tried to consume a ton of stuff, and so I'm taking in all of this from a research perspective, and I think that there's a lot to be said about how people learn or don't learn, and what products are good. And without kissing ass, there's a reason why I've stuck around in this group for 5+ years.
Yeah.
So a question, because we've touched on quite a few of these things, and you just said we could talk for more than an hour and a half, which we probably have already talked about. Do we want to break this up and come back and give people almost like an outline of here's what you need to do? Like, should we break it down step by step for people to?
It sounds like we should have David go back to all of our tutorials and make like a PDF that comes with it. And be like, you should be learning this since you've already watched them.
Oh my God!
And then like, here's the assignment.
I mean, there should be assignments. There really should. I mean,
a lot of them do, but we didn't start doing that until kind of later. It kind of depended on the production. It wasn't consistent.
Listen, we've evolved too. When we first started, we also made every photographer shoot with like every kind of camera in the world, to show accessibility. That it wasn't about. I mean, we've totally.
I still think that's a good idea.
No way, it's a terrible idea. You want to see the way a photographer works in their natural environment.
Depends on the tutorial.
As an instructor, I hated it. I hated working with a crappy camera that I was never going to use.
All right. So Rob Grimm's shooting with Hasselblad H whatever.
That's a
$30,000 camera.
But that doesn't mean that they have to have a $30,000 tool.
But you can still make that same image with the Canon 5D Mark III, which is what we made you use. So why set people up to initially be like, fuck, he's making these with a Hasselblad when you could just as easily make that photo with a 5D?
Because I can't just as easily, because now I have to adjust my thinking because I'm using a camera that I don't use every day. And when you talk about
Fixed mindset.
No, not fixed mindset.
Absolutely.
The camera is an extension of who I am. It should become less of an issue, and because my creativity and my lighting and everything else is what I'm concentrating on, not that tool.
You made good images with the 5D.
Yeah.
Right?
I can make a good image with anything. That's not the point.
Oh, so if you can make a good image with anything, then why not teach people with something that's more accessible?
Why not let people see me at my best, at my craft, doing what I do?
There was a section where you use the Hasselblad, but there was also a section with the 5D. Why not do both? David, should he have done both or just one? Would you have been more encouraged if he only shot with the Hasselblad?
I would not. I tend to believe that we have tools and that you should become a master of your tool. Not to say that you can't shoot with something else, but like, I shoot with Nikon. I bought Sony. I have an Olympus. I have all that stuff, but I like my Nikon because I can function it in the dark. I guess that's the infantryman in me. I know where every single button is. I don't have to look. Everything just flows. Whereas another camera, it becomes multitasking.
Yes.
Instead of concentrating on the what's in front of my camera, I'm now concentrating on the camera strictly because it's just not as familiar. Can I do it? Sure. Do I like it? No, I have my preference. And
Exactly.
My preference, I mean, I can shoot M249 too, but I like to shoot an M4. It's just what's more familiar because I used it more often.
I can lock up the mirror on a Canon, but it's so second nature on the Hasselblad. I can do it very quickly with 2-finger movements.
You're just being
is done.
lazy, Rob.
No.
Just being
Oh my
lazy,
God.
Rob.
He's making me crazy again.
Calm down, Rob Green. Jesus.
Tomas. All right. I think we should actually kind of wind this up because this has gone on a long time. And I think we have to have David back. And I think we're going to have to talk more about this and go into very specific...
Purpose of the outline. Wow.
I know. So let's call this part 1 because this was very philosophical kind of look at it all. And then we'll get back to it and we'll get into the nitty-gritty of what people should do.
Don't bother EDU none.
Another
well,
button.
here's again.
All right, David. Well, we'll let you get back to eating cheese up there in
It's date night. He's
the
going.
hills of Wisconsin.
They went to a fish fry without me.
Oh, shit.
Well, you better catch up now. Go on now, get.
Find them.
All right.
All right, man. I appreciate it. Talk to you later.
Peace.
To download this podcast and every podcast, you can go to proedu.com. We're also on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, you name it. MySpace. Boom.
Yeah.
David. Oh, hey, David, where do people go to find your work?
What is my website? DavidParish.com.
David Parish.
Did you have to think about it for a second?
DavidParishphotography.com, right?
Yeah, horrible with the website thing. I've put photography a little bit on a pause as I take care of my kids and as I mean, I'm not quitting. I'm just not concentrating quite as hard right now.
Right.
You're Papa Parish.
You're being a good dad.
Yeah.
Good for you. That's awesome.
Shout out to all the good dads out there. All right, let's get out of here.
Later. Thanks, David.
Pro EDU is now unlimited. Get access to every single tutorial. Sign up at proedu.com today. I don't know about you. I'll take comfort in that. This podcast is officially over. See you next time. Never stop learning.
Calm down, Rob Green. Jesus.
It's got a certain groove to it I like.
Across the board, marketing is so often the weak link in a photographer's business plan. If you don't know where your next client is coming from, chances are you don't have a marketing strategy. Because I see so many photographers who take their beautiful images and quickly and hastily just throw them up on social media and expect that to be enough to market their business. So how are we gonna fix your marketing problem? Well, we're gonna start by taking a top-down look at what it means to create a good and successful marketing plan for a photography business.
How do I tell my story through a blog post?
By creating content that's meant to answer questions, solve problems, and inspire your target market. We'll focus on how to bring inbound traffic to your website. For starters, that's what we're looking at when we talk about title. And your title is actually very important. We'll also talk about how to build outbound channels that broadcast your message to your target market. We're really focused on taking that amazing content that you produce and push it out into channels that your target market is already hanging out in. We'll look at every single one of the steps involved, including defining all the terms and getting into setting a course for your future business plan. Now, what I think we ought to dive into is a basic site audit that you can follow along with live on your own website. This course isn't about trying to figure out how to just do more marketing tasks. It's about starting over and redefining what you should be doing. Every company needs a marketing strategy to survive. Photography businesses are no different.